So with social media and with large groups of people in general, I tend to not be a very controversial guy, but I just feel like ranting about something that I never hear people talk about. Some people like the media for obvious reasons, but I remember I was one of those people who I did think that it was possible for Donald Trump to beat Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. I'm not going to lie and say that I thought he was going to win, but I did think that it was possible that he could win. And I stayed up that night, and I watched states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, and they were turning red, and I found that to be fascinating. But I gotta tell you, I was never surprised, and the next day I woke up not surprised at all. By the way, I stayed up all night because I couldn't wait for Hillary Clinton's concession speech, and she never delivered. At least she never delivered that night. And but anyway, you know, Hillary Clinton, and it blew my mind how the media didn't cover this. And then before you know it, we're getting into Russian conspiracy theories. I never could have guessed something like that. It doesn't surprise me, but you never hear anybody talk about the fact that, first of all, Hillary Clinton was the woman who talked about putting the coal miners out of business. And you think about it, and you have an entire region from like Pennsylvania to Michigan, that whole area, you have an entire area where a middle class was practically built because of the steel industry. And I mean, Pittsburgh is Steel City, for crying out loud. So one, that doesn't even surprise me at all that these people who perhaps were your conservative Democrats or Reagan Democrats, if that's a thing, they working class Democrats. Yeah, and a majority of them happen to be white, which is a crime, I know. But they were shocked when these people abandoned the Democratic Party and voted for Trump. And that just blows my mind because that off the bat seems very obvious to me. It seems obvious that he would win that region. But put that aside, Bernie Sanders. How many Bernie Sanders voters were abandoned? Or excuse me, how many Bernie Sanders voters were abandoned by the Democratic Party, and therefore they abandoned the Democratic Party when it came time to vote? Hillary Clinton stole the election from Bernie, right? And again, it just blows my mind. And a few other things I'd like to note, and people never talk about this. Bernie Sanders, who I actually predicted Bernie Sanders was going to be the next president. I really thought he was going to. I did not know Trump was going to run. He was a much different variable. But here's two things that Bernie and Trump had in common. They were protectionists, okay? And when I say protectionists, what I mean by that, they wanted to protect domestic labor, domestic workers, right? So they wanted to, they're okay with tariffs, they're okay with, assisting people at home. They're less free market oriented than at least now a lot of the rhetoric that comes out of the Republican Party and perhaps even the Democratic Party. So they were both protectionists. Also, I don't know what better word to use, but I'll say they were both non-neoconservatives. So what I mean by that is these were not interventionist candidates, or at least they did not run on an interventionist platform. I wouldn't say they were non-interventionists, that's not what I mean. But they were not interested in getting involved in all these wars overseas. That was a message that I think they both drove home. They weren't, Trump wasn't a George Bush or a John McCain, or anything like that. So they were non-neoconservative. They were both protectionists. And also, they both ran they both ran on a anti-corruption platform, right? Bernie did and Trump did. Bernie was going to, audit the Federal Reserve and, be tough on the big banks. Whether he would or not, I don't know. But they both were anti-corruption candidates. Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump actually had a lot in common. They're completely different politicians, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm pro-Bernie by any means, but they did have that in common. So that never gets addressed. It never gets addressed. And one last thing. When it comes to the Electoral College, right, people say, well, Hillary Clinton got more votes and all that. And there's lots of arguments out there defending the Electoral College, and I agree with probably all of them. But when you start out a campaign, you have a set of rules. These are the rules, okay? And we both have the same set of rules, and the rules are whoever gets the most electoral votes. The rules aren't whoever gets the popular vote. So to say that she won the election, no, she didn't. She didn't campaign to win the election. Donald Trump did. She took it for granted. And Kellyanne Conway and Donald Trump, by the way, Kellyanne Conway, I believe, is the first, she is the first female campaign strategist to win as far as the presidency is concerned. That doesn't get noted very often. But yeah, those were the rules. If we were playing for the popular vote, we would have had a different ground game. But we didn't, those weren't the rules. I just don't like hearing people complain about that. But anyway, I would love to hear people's thoughts. What do you think? How come you never, are those not obvious points? I think those are like obvious points. Here's a woman who wants to put the Rust Belt, we're going to put the coal miners out of business. And this whole region, like much of the middle class has depended on coal. Okay, so it makes sense that they would not want anything to do with her. That makes complete sense, first of all. Second of all, how many of the Democrats who were in that region voted for Bernie, right? And they felt abandoned. So how many of them stayed home? Or how many of them said screw it and went in and voted for Bernie, right? It's obvious. And what do you think about the fact that both Bernie Sanders, who I think would have won, I personally think he would have gotten the Democratic nomination if it was a fair way of, if that party was more fair with how they did things. But how do you feel about the fact that both Bernie and Trump, two people from complete opposite sides of the political spectrum, both of them ran on anti-corruption. They both ran on non-neoconservatism. And they both ran as protectionists, wanting to protect domestic workers. I think these are obvious points. I'd love to hear what other people have to say.